All right, welcome to your very own deep dive. And this time, we are going to be tackling bargaining in English. We've been poring over all the articles and notes that you sent, and gotta say, some really cool stuff in here. You ready to, really level up your negotiation game?
Yeah, it's interesting because it goes way beyond just like getting a good deal, though I'll admit that is definitely a nice bonus, right? But one thing that really stood out in the stuff you sent is how these skills can actually, boost your confidence in all kinds of situations, not just at the marketplace.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about it like that before, but it makes sense if you can, negotiate effectively. That's got to
Yeah.
be a huge confidence booster. Okay, so let's jump right into this material. What are some of the, big takeaways we should be focusing on?
Well, one that really jumped out at me is that, especially when you're traveling, bargaining can be kind of like a cultural dance, you know? Like in some cultures, haggling is not just expected, it's almost like a sign of respect for the seller, you know? It's a way to kind of build that rapport.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not just about the price. It's about the whole interaction and being part of that cultural exchange.
Exactly. You got it. And on that note of respect, one thing that was emphasized a lot in the material was the importance of politeness, you know? Like even if you're trying to get a lower price, you want to maintain a friendly and respectful tone throughout.
Yeah, for sure. You don't want to come across as aggressive or anything. It's
Yeah.
got to be assertive, but also diplomatic, right?
Sure.
Finding that sweet spot.
Totally. And, that brings us to another big takeaway that I saw. It's so important to have a sense of the market value of whatever you're buying, Do your research. If you know what a fair price is, you're going to be in a much stronger position to negotiate.
That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
So before you even set foot in that market, or even, if it's online, before you start clicking around, it's essential to do your homework right.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you could end up overpaying or even accidentally insulting the seller by offering something way too low.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of low offers, there's this whole psychological principle called anchoring bias. It's pretty fascinating. Basically, the first price that gets mentioned in a negotiation, it kind of sets the anchor for everything that comes after.
Oh, wow. So if the seller starts really high, it can be tough to bring them down to something you're comfortable with.
You got it. And that's why a lot of the materials you sent, they suggest, starting with an offer that's lower than what you're actually willing to pay, gives you some room to maneuver, and who knows, might even encourage the seller to be a little more reasonable.
So it's like a strategic first move, kind of like you're setting the tone for the whole negotiation. I like it.
Right. It's a bit of a game, isn't it? And speaking of interesting tactics, there was one that I thought was really cool, using silence as a negotiation tool. Now, that might sound kind of counterintuitive, but sometimes just pausing for a bit can be way more effective than words, believe it or not.
Silence. Really? How does that work?
Okay, imagine this. You've made a counteroffer, right? And the seller, they seem hesitant, maybe they're thinking it over. So instead of, jumping right back in with another offer, try just pausing for a second and letting them think. That silence, it can create a little anticipation, maybe even nudge them to come down a bit.
Oh, that's a good one. I never would have thought of that. It's it subtly shifts the power dynamic just a little bit.
Exactly. It gives you a moment to kind of, assess the situation and lets them really think through their options without feeling pressured. All right, so we've talked about the big ideas, the psychology, but I think now we should get into some of the more practical stuff. What do you say?
Okay, yeah. Let's talk about the actual phrases, the things you say when you're, right there in the moment trying to bargain for a better price. What are some go-to strategies? Yeah, so we've talked about, the kind of mental game of bargaining, but what about the words themselves? What do you actually say when you're in the middle of it all, trying to get that better price? What are the magic words?
Well, that's where all those practice exercises you said, those are really going to come in handy. They're like a little phrase book for bargaining success. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah. But it's got to be more than just memorizing lines, right? You have to know how to use them in different situations. Context is key or something like that, right?
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. It's all about understanding the how and the when. So, all right, let's put it into practice. Say you're at a flea market, right? And you spot this amazing vintage jacket, love at first sight. But, the price tag is a little bit eye-watering. So what's your opening line?
Okay, so not just how much is this?
Yeah.
Right. That's kind of putting all the power in the seller's hands.
Right. Exactly. You want to be a little more subtle. Try something like, is this your best price? It's like, you're politely hinting that you're open to, a little negotiation.
I see, I see. So it's like you're planting that seed early on,
Yeah.
setting the stage. Okay, so what if they say, well, I could come down a little. What's a good comeback for that?
Okay, here's a cool technique. It's called bracketing. Basically, you give them a range that's, slightly below what you're really willing to pay. So you could say something like, I was thinking more in the range of, amount to amount. Would you be open to something like that?
Bracketing, huh? I like it. It sounds a lot more flexible than just throwing out one number.
Yeah.
But, sometimes you get those sellers who are really stuck on their price. What do you do when they just won't budge?
This is where you got to get a little creative, Try appealing to their sense of fairness. You could say something like, look, I can tell you're proud of your work, and I really do appreciate the quality. But amount is, honestly, that's really stretching my budget. Any chance you could meet me halfway?
Ah, yeah, that's a good one. It's like you're acknowledging their side of things, but also, standing your ground a little bit. But okay, let's say you've tried all that and they're still not budging. What's the next move?
Well, sometimes the best move is to walk away. Might feel a little awkward, but just saying, okay, well, I'll think about it and maybe come back later, that can actually be pretty effective, believe it or not.
Right. We talked about the power of walking away before. It shows you're not like desperate, that you're willing to keep looking. But doesn't it run the risk that they'll sell it to someone else while you're gone?
Yeah, there's always that chance, but honestly, a lot of times sellers, they'd rather make a deal with you than risk losing a sale altogether. And if they do sell it, hey, maybe it just wasn't meant to be. There are plenty of other vintage jackets out there.
True, true. And I guess just the act of walking away can be, kind of a confidence booster in itself. Like you're reminding yourself that you're in control.
Exactly. All right, let's shift gears a bit. Imagine you're traveling, right? You're in another country and you want to hire a local guide. How would you go about negotiating their fee? I mean, it's a whole different ballgame when you're dealing with cultural differences and all that.
Yeah, you really have to be sensitive to those cultural nuances, right?
Yeah.
Don't want to accidentally offend anyone or, disrespect the local customs.
Absolutely. And, that's something that all the materials you sent really highlighted the importance of doing your homework on the local etiquette, especially when it comes to bargaining. Like, in some cultures, being super direct can be seen as rude, while in others, a little bit of playful banter is expected. So you got to read the room, so to speak.
Okay, so how do you strike that balance? What are some phrases that would work in that kind of situation?
Well, you want to start by expressing your interest in their services and asking about their rates, but in a really polite way, of course. So you might say something like, hey, I'm really interested in your tour. Could you tell me a little more about your pricing?
Okay, so far so good. But what if the price they give you is, a bit more than you were hoping for?
All right, so instead of blurting out, that's too expensive, which can come across as, a bit harsh, try something like, I really appreciate your expertise, but that's honestly a little outside my budget right now. Would you be willing to consider a slightly lower rate? Just a thought.
Okay, yeah. So it's all about how you phrase it, right? Being honest about your budget, but in a respectful way.
Yeah.
But what if they're still hesitant to come down on their price? Should you just give up at that point?
Not necessarily. Sometimes silence can be your best friend in these situations. After you've made your counteroffer, try just pausing for a moment and letting them mull it over. You might be surprised how often that little bit of silence can, encourage them to rethink things.
That's a great tip. It's like you're saying, bargaining is as much about psychology as it is about the actual words. You got to kind of read the other person,
Yeah, exactly. It's like a delicate dance,
Yeah.
You have to kind of feel the rhythm and adjust your steps as you go. And, while we're on that topic, there's another important element that we haven't touched on yet, nonverbal communication.
Oh, you mean like body language and stuff?
Exactly. Things like eye contact, smiling, using a friendly tone of voice. Those can make a huge difference in building that rapport and making the whole negotiation experience more positive for everyone involved. It shows that you're genuine, that you're really trying to find a solution that works for both sides.
So even if you're feeling a little nervous or unsure of yourself, you should try to project that confidence and friendliness, right?
Exactly. And remember, even if you don't end up getting the exact price you were hoping for, just the experience of bargaining itself can be really valuable, It's a chance to practice your language skills, learn about different cultures, and hey, maybe even make a new friend in the process.
Wow, this has been so insightful. You've really helped me see bargaining in a whole new light. It's so much more than just haggling over prices. It's about communication, cultural understanding, and honestly, I think personal empowerment too.
Yeah.
But before we wrap things up, I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of the common mistakes people make when they're trying to bargain. Like, what are some of the pitfalls to avoid?
Yeah, like are there any like rookie mistakes that people tend to make when they're first starting out with bargaining?
Oh, for sure, for sure. One of the biggest ones I see is, people being too timid. Like they get so nervous about, I don't know, offending the seller or seeming like too cheap, that
Yeah.
they end up just accepting that first price, even if they know it's probably too high.
Oh yeah, I think we've all been there, right? It's like you almost feel bad trying to get a better deal. So are you saying it's important to like push back a little bit even if it feels a little uncomfortable? Yeah, definitely. Like we've talked about, in a lot of cultures, bargaining is just part of the whole experience. It's not meant to be insulting. It's more like it's part of the game. They're probably expecting you to haggle a little bit. They probably even built a little wiggle room into that first price just in case.
Makes sense, makes sense.
Uh,
Okay, so even if I'm feeling a little shy, I should try to, channel my inner bargain hunter and at least give it a shot. But what about the opposite problem? Like, what if I go in too strong? What if I'm too aggressive and end up like turning the seller off completely?
Yeah, that's another common one. People get so caught up in getting that deal that they forget that bargaining is also about building a relationship, right?
Yeah.
It's not supposed to be a battle. Like if you come across as rude or demanding, you're probably going to get a pretty negative reaction.
Yeah, it's got to be that balance, right? Assertive, but also respectful.
Exactly. And, part of that is knowing when to walk away. Like if the seller is being completely unreasonable or if you're just not feeling good about the whole thing, it's totally okay to just, politely excuse yourself and go somewhere else.
Right, right. Walking away. Such a powerful move. It's like you're saying, hey, I'm not desperate.
Exactly. Shows you're in control. And a lot of times, honestly, that's all it takes to get the seller to reconsider their position.
Well, this whole deep dive it's been really amazing. I feel like I've learned so much, not just about, the practical side of bargaining, like the phrases and the techniques, but also the psychology behind it all.
I'm glad to hear that. And the most important thing to remember is that bargaining, it's like any skill. It takes practice. The more you do it, the more comfortable you'll get. It'll become second nature.
Yeah, totally. It's like
Yeah.
the more you put yourself out there, the more you learn.
Right. Absolutely. And don't forget that, bargaining isn't just for like marketplaces and tourist shops.
Yeah.
These skills, they can come in handy in all kinds of situations, negotiating a salary, getting a better price on a car, even just asking a friend for a favor. It's all kind of related.
That is such a good point. So to our listener out there, I say take these skills, get out there and give it a try. Start small. Maybe try negotiating a little discount at your local market or see if you can haggle for a better price online.
Yeah, and have fun with it. Bargaining, it can be a little challenging sometimes, but it can be a really fun experience. Who knows? You might surprise yourself with how good you are at it.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the art of bargaining in English. We hope you've learned some valuable tricks of the trade and feel ready to go out there and negotiate like a pro. And until next time, happy haggling.